Hello everybody, Humble here, and welcome to one of my first lists. Top 10 most disturbing moments in SpongeBob. SpongeBob and all of his history hasn't shied away from disturbing content, like SB129 in Season 1, or SpongeBob You're Fired in Season 9. So while doing the research and watching many episodes for this list, I realized that there's just too many disturbing scenes and episodes to narrow them all down to 10. So instead of just making a top 20 and bore all of you for 40 minutes, I'm going to count seasons 1 through 5 in this list and cover seasons 6 through 10 in the next video. So a couple disclaimers before we begin. First, just because I label something as quote-unquote disturbing doesn't automatically mean that it's bad. A good example of this is in SB129, where Squidward is alone and these random background noises say, alone, really eerily and overlap each other. I'm sure a lot of you guys can agree with me that that scene is disturbing, but not in an unwatchable or unenjoyable way, so take my answers with a grain of salt. And second, with that, I'm mainly going to cover the bad disturbing scenes, and only a couple good ones sprinkled here and there, because it gets way worse if disturbing scenes are already bad. So, let's dive into number 10. Number 10. Whatever Happened to SpongeBob? This episode is already a pretty mediocre special on its own, but if you've seen this episode before, you probably know what I'm already talking about. And that's, of course, this image of a grotesque SpongeBob. The shot is only seen for around 3 seconds, but the more you stare at it, the worse it gets. The tiny little hairs on the top and sides of his head, the snot coming out of his eyes, I mean, how? And it's all just really revolting and character deteriorating, and already from a terrible episode comes this? The reason I put it so low on the list is because it only happens for about 3 seconds in the episode, and the episode itself is already pretty miserable, so I don't think it needs any more bashing. Number 9. Squidbob Tentacle Pants. Squidbob Tentacle Pants is honestly a pretty good episode. It's a full-on science fiction episode where Sandy creates this machine that can teleport SpongeBob to the Krusty Krab on time. But when she tests the machine, it ends up fusing SpongeBob and Squidward together. This is not the disturbing part, however. I just find this scene pretty cool. The disturbing part is at the end of the episode, where Sandy fixes SpongeBob and Squidward and accidentally fires the machine at everybody, including Pearl, Mr. Krabs, Patrick, and Mrs. Puff, and a lot of others. So this is created. Dear God, what is that thing? I know it's a shock value ending, but jeez. I mean, seeing SpongeBob wheeze and Mr. Krabs' heavy breaths is so unsettling to look at. So I guess you can show this to kids now. Great, here's the thing. When SpongeBob and Squidward were fused together, it wasn't in such a gross way like this. It actually looked normal. I mean, where did that eye even come from? Now that would scar me if I was a kid watching this, and it kinda still does now. Number 8. Where's Gary / Have You Seen This Snail? I know this episode is loved by many, and I'm not saying it's bad. I love it too. But when I was a kid, I saw this scene, and it made an imprint in my mind ever since I've watched SpongeBob. There's a scene at the end of the episode where, while Gary is staying with this grandma character, Gary comes upon a closet full of dead snails. Well, their shells at least. And a painting of all the snails before they, died yell at Gary to run! Apparently, this grandma character, and no, she doesn't actually have a name, was fattening up Gary until eventually Gary would have died. I don't know, the thought of this grandma character killing so many snails, and even was going to kill Gary, really scared me as a child. And rewatching this, I couldn't shake that feeling away. My personal theory on this episode is that Grandma wasn't just a well-meaning idiot and never realized she was killing her snails. I mean, I don't know how anybody could not notice, but whatever. I believe that she was fattening up all these snails in order to eat them. Why else would she be fattening up Gary, and why all the shells were empty without bodies? I know it's pretty grim for a SpongeBob episode, but heck, that's what this list is for. Even as a kid, I thought of this theory, and it has stuck with me forever, and as soon as I made this list, I knew this would be somewhere on it. I just didn't think it would be so low. Number 7. Ghost Host. In this episode, the Flying Dutchman is blinded by the night fog and crashes his ship in between some rocks. Unable to get it repaired immediately, the Flying Dutchman forces his way to stay with SpongeBob. Throughout the episode, the Flying Dutchman haunts SpongeBob with some pretty disturbing images, like that weird clown melted into a guy with a pipe, and SpongeBob having his tongue and eyes crawl around the floor. This is really an episode I can't describe enough to do it justice. To fully experience this episode, I would go watch it for yourself. It's a really good episode, and this is one of those cases where the disturbingness is not unwatchable. Being a fan of horror and creepypastas, I enjoy this kind of shock humor and would recommend this episode to anybody who hasn't seen it. I also find the scene with Squidward's mother to be a bit uneasy though. Number 6. The Thing. Squidward tries to relax alone, but SpongeBob and Patrick interrupt Squidward's evening enough to drive him out of his own home. Enraged, Squidward runs off and hits a cement truck that pours a mountain of concrete on Squidward. But this also gets him stung by jellyfish for no reason. SpongeBob and Patrick mistake Squidward for some wild animal and decide to adopt. Throughout the episode, SpongeBob and Patrick don't know this is Squidward, and the really disturbing part is that they would treat any animal like this. Patrick throws a ball at Squidward's face over and over, and they drop him a lot. And if this were any other animal, SpongeBob and Patrick would not change a single thing. Also, even if they knew it was Squidward, they treat him pretty much the same in the beginning of the episode. So the combination of a bad episode and the disturbing thoughts you get while watching the episode, it boils down to just a terrible viewing experience. Number 5. A Flea in Her Dome. A Flea in Her Dome's plot is basically Sandy comes home from Texas. She accidentally brings a flea with her, and it terrorizes SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy for the remainder of the episode. But I'm not here to rank the episode itself. I just want to talk about the flea, because its character design is just too realistic for me. I mean, just look at it. The flea crawls all over everybody and even scratches Sandy's eyes. It is very unsettling to look at, and why would you want to see a flea this detailed up close? You even get to watch it give birth on Sandy and watch its larvae crawl out of their chambers. And plus, coming from a pretty bad episode in the first place, the flea is the only thing to really remember from this episode. And do you really want this to be stuck in your mind? Number 4. House Fancy. If any of you guys have seen this episode or a review on it, you probably know what I'm going to talk about. The toenail scene. The rest of the episode is fine, but in the toenail scene, SpongeBob and Squidward move furniture around his house to impress a local TV show host and Squilliam. SpongeBob then forgets his morals and turns oblivious for a second, as he then continues to drive a couch leg into Squidward's foot. He then rips it out in an extremely disgusting scene, and just, I don't know how this even made it into the episode. It's not funny at all. To me, the worst part about this is the audio. You get to hear the nail cracking and Squidward's veins getting ripped out and just, ugh. I mean, just watch it for yourself. Also, another reason why I personally hate this scene Back, around 5 or 6 years ago, one of my friends hit his pinky toe right on the corner of a wall, and the entire nail came off, and I saw the whole thing. I'm not gonna go into further detail about it, it's super gross, but every time I watch this, it puts that bad memory back in my mind every time. Trust me though, the real thing is way worse. Maybe there was a disconnect between the writers and the animators, but I just don't know how this wasn't cut out. It's not that long of a scene, so if they cut it out, it would have been fine. Heck, Nickelodeon could have gotten some more advertising, seeing how greedy they can be sometimes. I would suggest this episode to anybody who hasn't seen it, but with this in it, I can't say that I can recommend it to everyone. Number 3. Fungus Among Us. Part of the infamous 83 trilogy with Waiting and Rise and Shine, this cannot be good. So this is a full-out, gross-out episode. There's not too many jokes other than, look at this slime, ew, it's gross. While, yes, the fungus you look at is pretty disgusting, but it takes up the entire episode. I mean, just look at SpongeBob after the fungus consumes him, and before the fungus slowly consumes SpongeBob and everyone else in the Krusty Krab. That's really my main problem with this episode as a whole. After the first 3 minutes of the episode, it's just non-stop gross out. There's fungus on SpongeBob, there's fungus on Squidward, there's fungus all over the Krusty Krab. There's fungus even in the food, and you get to watch the customers eat it and they never realize. I don't understand how everybody in the Krusty Krab can be so oblivious. Squidward doesn't even realize he has any fungus on him until it's consumed his entire body. And another thing that really bothers me while watching this episode is the fungus makes the victim very itchy. I don't know about you, but watching every SpongeBob character scratch their skin out made me really itchy watching the episode. That's the perfect word for all of this mess. Itchy. And I don't think I've elaborated on SpongeBob enough because he is the main character after all. Seeing SpongeBob shoot pus and slime out of his pores is just really disgusting. And I felt uneasy watching the main character get consumed by this fungus. Number 2. To love a patty. SpongeBob falls in love with a Krabby Patty after making a perfect Krabby Patty. So this concept, even on paper, sounds really weird. SpongeBob has never had any romantic feelings for anyone in the series. Oh, and don't worry, this episode makes sure you know that SpongeBob is romantically interested in this Krabby Patty. He dresses it up in a sun hat and takes it on a romantic candlelit date at the Krusty Krab. If you want some more proof, SpongeBob completely murders clams after they were going after his patty. And he doesn't just punch them or push them away or doing something comical, as you would think SpongeBob is good at. Nope, he straight up rips one in half in the middle of the screen. You get to watch the clam's tongue rip off of its body and fall to the ground. This is by far the most disturbing part of the episode, and why it's so high on the list. I can't see how SpongeBob was so oblivious that these are living, breathing creatures that he just murdered for a lifeless patty. Just a few episodes ago, SpongeBob and Patrick were taking care of a baby clam way more than any other creature would. So this just adds to the more disturbingness, and seeing SpongeBob's original character being completely destroyed into a prime example of some seasonal rot SpongeBob. Alright, before I get into number 1, here are some honorable mentions. I was a teenage Gary. I originally was going to add this maybe at the top of the list because of the scene where SpongeBob transforms into a snail. But while yes, it does give me goosebumps while I watch, it's not really that disturbing. It's just pretty cool. Good neighbors. I have more hate for this episode than disgust. While writing my notes for this episode, I realized that many of my points were for how bad watching it was. So yes, this episode is really bad, but not that disturbing or gross. Now, without further ado, number 1, Spongehenge. While looking at the episodes to see which one I would like to review for this list, I knew it in my gut. Spongehenge would be somewhere on this list. I, however, didn't think it would be this high. Let me break it down for you guys. In the beginning, SpongeBob gets hit by some leftover food that flew into the window and goes outside to find whoever lost it. SpongeBob realizes that the holes in his body create music through the wind, and a swarm of jellyfish enjoy the music SpongeBob makes. In the morning, SpongeBob fails to get to work because the jellyfish want him to stay in his house. Mr. Krabs then uses a fishing line in order to get SpongeBob into work. Don't worry, that face is not the reason why I find this at number 1. Eventually, SpongeBob gets blown out of the Krusty Krab by a windstorm, underwater I might add, and runs into a cave. For some reason, SpongeBob grows a beard and starts to turn crazy after talking to himself and a rock carving that he made of himself. Without anyone for crazy SpongeBob to bounce off of, it just stands out as really creepy. A full minute of this episode is just SpongeBob creating and talking to the stone statue of himself. Afterwards, SpongeBob discovers that the statue can create music by itself, and it could lure the jellyfish away from SpongeBob. This plan turns out not to work, and the jellyfish don't like the music that the statue creates. So you know what would solve this problem? More stone statues! And somehow, this works? Yeah, alright. So SpongeBob returns to the Krusty Krab, and my best guess is that either the windstorm killed everyone in Bikini Bottom, or SpongeBob outlived them all, which doesn't make sense in the first place, so I'm gonna have to assume that the windstorm killed everyone, which is super eerie and disturbing anyways. I mean, think about it. If SpongeBob did not go into the cave, he would be dead! And after the episode, SpongeBob would have to live as this crazy sponge that hadn't had any interaction with anyone for a really long time. It's really character damaging to see SpongeBob turn not even a shell of his former self, to think that he used to be this super chipper and happy guy. The episode ends 3,000 years later, when aliens come and visit the stone statues, and the camera zooms in onto one of the statues with SpongeBob laughing in the background. Knowing for sure that SpongeBob is dead 3,000 years later, I mean, maybe in Spongetron form, it makes his laugh that much more scary. I mean, this is some serious nightmare fuel for really any demographic watching. Plus, it gets worse every time you watch it, because every time I watch this, I found something new to fear every time. Alright, I'm gonna go watch some of my favorite episodes so I can remember why I love SpongeBob so much. Might I suggest Krusty Towers? So to anyone who has made it this far, a special thank you to you guys watching. And if you like SpongeBob, I've done reviews on SpongeBob versus the Big One, and you can even watch my first video ever on SpongeBob's house party. I hope you'll really enjoy them. I will try to get the next video, season 6 through 10, out as soon as I can. Hopefully it will be out in about a week or so. So with that, thank you all for sticking around this long, and I'll see y'all later.